Are y'all able to see this okay? I'm going to assume yes. Okay, sweet. Awesome. So yeah, Amy over in Eanes ISD, Sarah from Keep Texas Beautiful. Very cool youth ambassador program for the state. That's really exciting. We can also connect more on that later if you'd like. ELA teacher working at Austin International. Very cool. Austin International is great. I've definitely gone and presented to y'all's science kind of team in the past too. So again, I can talk a little bit more about, so at Keep Austin Beautiful, we have a number of education programs that focus on kind of keeping our waterways clean, and so watershed-based and water quality-based education that incorporates service learning and project-based learning. And then we also have sort of a zero-waste education focus. And then we also have a Green Teens program that is an after-school program throughout the school year, and then a paid summer internship for high school youth that focuses on like professional development, curriculum design, and just environmental education kind of learning and practice. And again, today I'm going to be talking more about youth leadership in particular, and I'll go through some of these slides. So just an introduction to this Earth Force piece that I'm bringing in. So Earth Force is a nonprofit. I believe they're located in Colorado, but work internationally. And their mission is to engage young people as active citizens who improve the environment and their communities now and in the future. And I'm sharing some of these resources from this conference that I attended earlier this year. And because I'm kind of working with them in sort of an ambassadorship type role. But in this process, essentially, I'm not going to go through all these steps, but essentially it involves engaging youth in the classroom through adult youth partnership, and really having youth do research on their own to identify issues that are affecting them and their communities, and using kind of that engagement to work through a whole process of actually identifying policy and community practices that may need to shift around that, focusing on long-term goals and policy change, and then like actually involving them in some sort of advocacy project. And I'll talk through some of these pieces in a moment, but just to define some of these bits that I've been talking about. So civic action, just engagement essentially in local community, in your municipality or in your watershed community, thinking about local engagement, and means working to make a difference in the civic life of our communities and developing the combination of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference. And then this youth adult partnership piece is what I'm really focusing on. So essentially what I mean by this is when both youth and adults come together to achieve a common goal, working side by side. Adults do not assume an inherent authority, so there's not a power differential there that's being enacted. And so that the adults working in this situation with the youth can accept that they can learn just as much as they can teach in this partnership. And so talking about why this is important, as we engage youth, the youth feel motivated and are able to develop these civic skills following if they have the experience to like actually engage in an issue that directly affects them, and engage in sort of democratic processes that really allow for that youth voice to be heard. And then also there's a lot of research that shows that this kind of civic engagement from a young age leads to that environmental stewardship, civic engagement much later on in life. And a lot of that is really related to the ability of student choice to be in the process. And then additionally, you know, actually having these youth adult partnerships, it's that reciprocal relationship. So it benefits everyone. You can think of it as a community process. It's increasing the equity in the process. All communities are represented. And it allows for, yeah, a variety of perspective when making decisions. Adults are able to learn from the youth experience as well. And then it can dismantle some of these intergenerational stereotypes that we have, and just increase respect in the classroom too. And so some key elements of both the civic action and then civic action in partnership with youth. So from the Selden et al. Study, you know, youth adult partnerships have 4 key elements. Authentic decision making, so that means centering of youth voices and not just tokening those youth. And we can maybe talk a little bit about what that looks like later on too. Actually having natural mentors, so having adult allies who like really understand kind of the process. Reciprocity, having a hard time with that word today for some reason, but essentially youth and adults co-learning shoulder to shoulder and really recognizing that both parties have something to bring to the table there. And then community connectedness. So this also allows for youth to connect with community leaders, and adults also seeing youth as meaningful community partners in the process. And so this might like sound like really large scale, but this is also something that we can do in the classroom. We can do as we're building, you know, curriculum even, or different activities that we're working to engage youth with in our programs. And so these elements, again, foster civic action, these being student voice, deliberative discussions, having these real world interactions, and also having educators that are supported throughout the process. So talking a little bit more about youth engagement and youth partnership. So this is a spectrum from the children's participation from tokenism to citizenship. This is a spectrum of youth engagement. And so we can see at the bottom, we have these non-engagement pieces. So that could be like manipulation, decoration, tokenism. And then as we kind of move up this chart, right, we have, you know, kind of in the middle where young people maybe have assignments, right? Maybe they have certain roles that have been given to them and they're kind of informed around that process. And then moving up from there, you know, young people are actually brought into that decision-making process and are informed by what's going on. Moving forward from that, we have adult initiated and shared decisions with young people. So again, adults sort of leading the process, but young folks are more involved. And then we get into the highly engaged piece of this spectrum. And so here, you know, we have young people are leading and initiating action, and then, you know, young people and adults are sharing decision making. So regardless of, you know, where this is taking place, this spectrum can happen anywhere, right? And again, you know, not this spectrum, you know, might not be, sorry, Saturday morning, trying to wake up a little bit, but you know, you may not be at the top of this spectrum. I know that in the work that I do, both at Keep Boston Beautiful and through CCCN, you know, we're more so in this middle section here, and are trying to work and grow towards those higher engagement pieces. And you know, there are different barriers to why we might be able to access some of those pieces versus others. And so I think that's important to understand as well. You know, it's not like, I'm not like, if you're down here, it's bad. It's just like, this is a spectrum of engagement, and it's good to think about, you know, where we might fall as teachers, as educators, as people who are building things like ambassadorship programs with youth. And so just a question for y'all, which you're welcome to share in the chat, or you can even share out loud, is just, you know, like where do you find yourself in your work kind of on this spectrum? Where are you maybe trying to, what are your goals here? And also, yeah, like in what ways are you incorporating youth voice into your like classroom or programming? So if anyone has anything around that, you're welcome to share in the chat, or you can unmute as well.
Hi.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. So I asked the question earlier. So can you define tokenism for me?
Yeah, sorry if I didn't catch that earlier.
No, not a problem.
Yeah, so I would define tokenism as, I'm trying to see if I can like give an example here, but essentially having a youth at the table just for the sake of having a youth at the table, if that makes any sense. So I think oftentimes this can really happen. Yeah, in the work that I'm doing with my youth leadership working group through CCCN. For example, if we just had youth, but they weren't actually, decision makers, weren't really able to participate, and we really had them there as a point of sort of reference in order to say like, oh, we have a youth here, but didn't actually have that youth participating and value them.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'd like to share about how hopefully heading towards the highly engaged part of this spectrum. And so this week we're doing, this coming week, we have what we call International Week. And so each grade level studies a different country around the world. And in our case, it's Russia for middle school. And so because I'm an English language arts teacher, I gave my students in 6th grade the option to choose how they would like to represent this country. And they chose to do a skit. So we've been doing some dress rehearsals this past Friday. And they created this skit entirely by themselves. They wrote it, they edited it, they're acting it, they're bringing, the props, they've made the props. So I'm really impressed with them.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and that's exactly that kind of connection that like I'm talking about here. So exactly that, like having them, lead their own learning in that sense by choosing how they want to interpret that assignment.
Good. I was trying to get can you see my face because I can't figure out how to get that on?
I don't think your camera is on from what I.
Okay. I didn't think so. I didn't want you to speak to a non-face. I'm sorry.
All good. Yeah. I understand Zoom can be a little tricky sometimes.
Yeah.
No worries. But
okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. Does anyone else have any experiences with this kind of spectrum that they'd like to share, or just how you're engaging youth voice in the work that you do, or how you're envisioning to?
I can share. This is Amy. I've been in working with EANS. This is my 3rd year, but previously I was an educator in Ohio, and I had established an outdoor education program there, where part of it were authentic experiences where students were taking action in the community and then proposing changes in terms of like, there was an erosion project and adding park benches to a community park. And so I'm really interested in bringing it. I'm an instructional coach for an elementary, and I want to bring something similar to our elementary here. And so I'm just trying to learn more about who to connect with, and, you know, the partnerships that are in Texas that I can work with. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. And it sounds like, yeah, that the work that you were doing sounds like really in line with kind of what I'm talking about here as well. Yeah, I mean, thinking about, and we can maybe also talk a little bit more at the end of this, but there are definitely so many organizations here in the Austin area that do a lot of that sort of like project-based learning. Keep Austin Beautiful is one of those. So even if you were interested in, you know, having one of our educators come in and talk about some of, you know, different ways to engage around water quality, around zero waste, that's something I can also talk about later on if that's something you'd be interested in. But yeah, I love that you're kind of thinking about how to increase that where you are now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And I can move forwards from here, but we can talk a little bit more about this as we go along as well. But so thinking about sort of this next piece of like different things that you can incorporate to really, you know, build this kind of partnership, and then also the civic engagement piece. So with youth adult partnership, some of the easier things, I guess, to just kind of like start building that kind of relationship or building upon that relationship are things like even incorporating democratic decision making into the classroom or into your programming. So I know that Susan mentioned some of that going on in her classroom. And so that could look like so many different things, right? Allowing students to kind of choose what route they're going to take with an assignment. If you're trying to, you know, get students rallied around, you know, doing some sort of like green design on campus, maybe you want to build a community garden on the campus or a rainwater garden, you know, like actually involving the students in that decision-making process as well. And so that can look like voting, you know, in different ways, talking through different issues, and really allowing students to bring their concerns and needs to the table. And I know, you know, sometimes as an educator, we might think that we know what's best. And so really taking that down a notch and acknowledging too that, you know, youth know what is best for youth to an extent. You know, and so like really listening to their needs and desires in a process when you're trying to do a project together. This can also look like respect agreements. Some of y'all may already do this in the classroom. We can also call this like a community agreement. And that looks like, if you're not familiar with that, oftentimes that looks like, okay, like here are the different, you know, guidelines we're going to follow when working together. When we're here in the classroom, you know, we're going to listen to one another. We're going to respect each other's time. We're going to try to contribute, as, you know, if that's something that's maybe harder for us, or, you know, step back if maybe we're sharing and taking up a little bit more space than what we have. And so even having a respect agreement where both, you know, adults and youth in the group are all participating in that agreement at an equitable level, you know, that's something that we can also do to kind of build that partnership and that trust. And so again, that reciprocity piece as well. So really understanding that, you know, we have just as much to learn from youth as they have to learn from us. I attended an AISD equity circle or summit a while back, and there was a youth on the call who, all of these teachers were really expressing their frustration, and we can't engage youth. How do we do this? We're just having a really hard time connecting with the students in our classrooms. And one of the youth leaders on the call, was bringing up, well, like, what's in it for me? Like, what does that connection mean to me? And that really stuck with me really hard. Just really thinking about, like, yes, obviously as educators, we want to engage our youth, but thinking about, what does that relationship mean for them? Are we serving as a mentor? Are we serving as someone they can really trust and come to when they want things as well? So really thinking about that reciprocity. And then also, this can be leadership roles in the classroom. And as we were talking about that spectrum earlier, we have both, maybe assigned roles, and then we also have, students actually wanting to, take on certain roles. And so trying to engage students in that process and giving them or allowing them to have that agency in the decision-making process. And again, really recognizing that students already are leaders. They already have power. And so really thinking about what it looks like to power share in that relationship and in that space. And then, also having committees where students are making decisions about what goes on in the classroom, or what goes on in your program. And these are things that, in the programming that I do with youth involving, service-based learning, project-based learning here in Austin. Like, these are also things that I'm working towards incorporating more so in my programming, because right now, I go out to the classroom and I don't necessarily really have the opportunity to involve youth in making those decisions about what they're learning. So that's something that I'm trying to increase on my end as well. And then with the civic engagement piece, the process here kind of looks like first identifying an issue, using research and inventories and that democratic decision making to choose an area of focus. And so, if you have maybe even an outside educator coming in and teaching something that really riles the students up and they get really excited about it, how can we move forward with that energy to actually focus on an issue that might be affecting students really close to home? And so these are sort of those steps that take that interest a little bit further into more of the community action piece. And so as we're thinking about that too, really bringing in this conversation of learning the scope of the community that's affected by an issue. So it might be that students get really excited about something or are frustrated about something that's happening, in their classroom even, and taking action there. But it might be the school. It might be the school in the surrounding area. Even in the city, right? Maybe it's litter in Austin, or their watershed. Maybe it's toxic algae in the Colorado River. And so with each of these pieces, really taking into consideration what, if you're really trying to address that issue, how to scale, I guess, that project. And so then on this process as well, identifying policy change and action steps needed to address that issue, and identifying stakeholders and resources in the process. So these are all just things that we can kind of start doing to learn some of that sort of civic action and engagement piece. And so just sort of from that starting bit, starting by collecting data. I liked how in Larry Joe's presentation on nature journaling, she even started with let's look at the metadata of where we are. And so really, as we're thinking about some of these kind of research-driven projects and pieces, doing inventories, and that could look like water quality monitoring, could look like mapping, or a home trash or energy audit, measuring the waste that you're generating in the classroom. bringing in sort of that scientific component, or you can also or you can also do descriptive inventory examples. So things that are surfacing in the media, if you have an age group that's kind of at that level where they're engaging with news, interviewing peers, so involving these different tools as well, surveying peers, speaking with local institutions. And so, as we're starting to kind of identify an issue, really having these students do the research up front and be driven by what they're interested in. And so, if the goal of the project is to like have students identify an issue at large and you don't already have that issue identified, different things might be coming up for different students. And so then, you might have multiple issues kind of brought to the table, and you can kind of set up different criteria for what you can choose to work together on as a classroom or as a project. And so, yeah, these are just some examples. Maybe more students care about this issue. Maybe it has a larger scale. We're going to have to, talk to someone to make this change versus like just something that we're changing on our own. If you're really trying to address something at a kind of larger level. And so bringing students into like a voting process to actually decide on what issue they're going to focus on at hand. And then thinking about equity too, as we're making this kind of decision. So, if you're fully involving youth in decision making, that is an equitable process in and of itself, because that is involving the community at hand in the community decision making process. But if some of these issues that students are bringing up don't necessarily affect them, taking a harder look at that and really kind of talking through the equity piece of like actually involving communities at hand who this might be affecting and reaching out if that's necessary. And so then, continuing to do research once an issue has been identified, doing research around that issue, and then also identifying, the stakeholders in that process. So if, this is one example, maybe impervious surfaces at the school are creating flooding, who are we going to need to talk to? Or maybe they're noticing that the composting, or that there's no composting on campus. Who can we actually start talking to around that? Or yeah, even thinking about like park benches or, trash cans at the local park. How can we, do our research and figure out who we actually are going to have to reach out to? And then sort of as you're moving through that process, really having the youth kind of set some really clear goals around their project. And so that all of those pieces are really identified there. So really IDing, what the change needs to be, what that end result is going to be, and then also very specifically identifying like, who do we need to work with, what needs to change on sort of that maybe like policy practice level. And so just to kind of wrap up around that piece of the process. So after all of that has been established, really allowing students to take action. So that could be, sending letters and emails to those stakeholders and starting that communication, organizing community meetings and gatherings to talk more about this issue. And as, this process takes place, students are able to learn real world skills in project development, leadership research, civic engagement, while again tapping into that agency, individual voice, and understanding of that role in community that I think many of us who work in sort of the environment in particular, again, if students are able to really connect to place, connect to their home, their community, their environmental community, that is something that has really been shown to last throughout their lifetime. So we're really building up those environmental stewards and citizens. But again, foundational to doing this work successfully is really building that equitable partnership, that reciprocity and trust in the relationship. And so, these are just some questions if y'all want to talk about some of this, but we can also open it up to different areas of focus that y'all want to have regarding the work you do with youth. So some of these are, what is the way that you could see your classroom or students engaging? Where are you trying to build that youth-adult partnership? Are there any issues that the students you work with are kind of like bringing up that maybe you're trying to work with to bring to the table? And again, kind of this like wrapping up piece of just, a question that I ask myself is like, what if we really encourage taking action instead of teaching students that they don't have a voice in these things that address them? Because, as I think many of us have probably seen even in recent times, the youth voice is really powerful. And so really like, how can we power share to allow for that to even be more amplified? These are some additional resources on youth-adult partnerships, and some of these resources from Earth Force. They have a lot of like curriculum and worksheets and all of that too. But I can go ahead and stop.
Gabby, will you be able to share this with us, your PowerPoint?
Yeah, I believe.
Because I wanted to let you know, so as part of our research skills class, students were empowered to come up with an idea that affects them, right? So they brainstormed and they came up with a social media piece that they're very interested in researching, and how that's what I'm trying to say is they're looking at the addiction side of it. They really feel that there's an addiction to social media. So they want to interview their peers and they want to get out in the larger community and research this. And I just feel like a couple of your pieces, it's not so much that we were missing them, but I think that it'll make it more clear. It'll help them be more clarified in their research.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I think this PowerPoint will be shared out, I believe, on Monday. Sarah's going to send out all of this information. And you're also welcome to, I think, yeah, if you want to email me afterwards too, I can share some of those kind of more curriculum pieces too. And
Great.
And stuff. But yeah, that sounds really great. I like that that's something y'all are already doing. And yeah, I think with this kind of information that I shared today, I think some of it is really just helpful in terms of really solidifying some of those pieces, so that, yeah, there can be like a really clear focus with the project.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm noticing, yeah, I will share my links. If y'all want to give me your emails, I can also email y'all directly. I see that Amy just added hers. Sweet, thanks y'all. I'll just take a note of these. Yeah, thank you all. Does anyone have any additional questions from this, or like any brainstorming that you'd like to do? I'm happy for that as well. And I will also mention, if anyone is actively working with youth at the moment, or high school or college aged youth even, with the Youth Leadership Working Group that I'm a chair of, we are currently having sort of monthly meetings that involve youth-focused organizations. So some organizations, for example, are like Urban Roots here in Austin, or Austin Youth River Watch. We have a lot of, sort of youth-focused, youth development organizations here in the Austin area joining in on our meetings. And then we also have participating youth. So it's kind of a, just a space for us to continue to talk more about what it looks like to build these relationships, and also really focusing on building pathways for equitable green careers and like equitable, great question. They're virtual for the time being. So yeah, virtual meetings, youth and organizational leaders are more than welcome to attend. And I can send out some information around that too, if folks are interested. But a big focus of that is really building sort of these green career pathways locally here in Austin as well. And so, yeah, if folks are working with even like middle school or high school youth too, it can also be a networking space and a space to, even find out opportunities about different internships that they could participate in, and all of that. Perfect. Yeah, we have 2 minutes left. I really appreciate y'all joining me for this presentation today. If you have any last questions or anything you'd like to share around the work that you're doing, I'd be happy to hear that. And again, I will email y'all all with this information, and you're more than welcome to touch base with me in the future as well.